Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 7 of our readings. This week, we are going to be reading together Exodus chapters 8 through 11, which is the story of the plagues and leading up to the Passover event in which the Israelites are liberated from slavery and escape Egypt into the promised land through the leadership of Moses. And so this is a very big story. And I think I would begin just by reminding all of us that the Bible is a meta-narrative. In other words, it's a big story. We tend to want to read chronologically. And so the way we approach the scriptures, typically we start with the Old Testament, we read it chronologically, and then we get to the New Testament. And the Old Testament seems to be a little confusing to us because it's such an ancient story. New Testament is a little bit more relatable. But the reason that we have trouble with the Old Testament is because we're reading it in the wrong way. The best way to read the Old Testament is through the lens of the New Testament. In other words, read it through the lens of the gospel, understanding that it is a meta-narrative. It's really about Jesus. It's about Jesus and his redemptive work. And that's especially true of Exodus 8 through 11, because as we read through the plagues, we are reminded of a few things. First of all, we are reminded of God's power. God is saying to the Egyptians, I am the one true God. The Egyptians were very polytheistic. Some people think they had thousands of gods. We recently took a group to Egypt, and I was blown away by the number of gods, little g, that you see everywhere in ancient Egypt, in the pyramids and in just about every other aspect of their culture. It was very, very polytheistic. They had a god for just about everything in life. They had a god for the sun, they had a god for light, they had a god for insects, they have a god for fertility, they have a god for death, they have a god for crops. Every aspect of life was represented by a god in Egypt. Most scholars believe that each one of the plagues represents God saying to the Egyptians, I am the true God. Because each one of those plagues was pointing to a specific God. They even had a frog god, so even the frogs was a way of God saying, your gods are powerless. I am the one true God. And so it points to God's power, also points to God's provision. The Israelites cried out to God for liberation from slavery, and God answered that prayer. It also shows his providence, because the events of Exodus point to a time in which the true Lamb of God would come to this earth, live among men and women, and die on the cross for us. And you remember John the Baptist, when he saw Jesus, said, here is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. It's pointing back to this passage in Exodus. And also the Passover event itself, when Jesus met with the disciples before his death. He gathered them around that table, and he explained the meaning of the Passover. He said, I am the body. I am the bread of life. I am the new covenant in this cup. I am the Lamb of God. In fact, it's been pointed out that the one thing that wasn't at the Passover table when Jesus had that first Lord's Supper with the disciples, the one thing that wasn't at the table that was missing was the lamb. Because the lamb was not at the table on the table because the lamb was at the table. It's Jesus himself. And so all of these things are pointing to Jesus, but they also remind us of his power, and they remind us of his provision. He hears us in our prayers, and he reminds us of his providence. God's timing is perfect. He has a plan for our lives. He knows what he is doing. And everything that he is doing in our life is in his timing. So these are the important lessons that we learn in this passage that we are reading this week. God bless you. I can't wait to see you Sunday.